Nobody in Cascade County, Idaho could quite understand why 10-year-old Milo Winter spent an entire summer painting every door on his family's barn a different, oddly specific combination of color and pattern, stripes on one, a solid diamond shape on another, thick bands on a third, working through his family's whole collection of outbuilding doors with a precision that seemed considerably more serious than an ordinary summer art project. Milo had been diagnosed as colorblind at 7, a common form of red-green color vision deficiency that made certain everyday distinctions genuinely difficult for him, and most of Cascade County assumed his door painting project was simply a colorblind kid's charmingly stubborn way of imposing some order on a world of colors he couldn't always tell apart. They weren't wrong that Milo's colorblindness was at the center of the project. They were wrong about almost everything else. That October, a fast-moving nighttime fire broke out in the Winter family's largest hay barn, and the firefighters who responded, working through thick smoke in near-zero visibility, found Milo's odd, specific door markings considerably easier to navigate by than any of the standard emergency signage the county had used for years, for reasons that had everything to do with exactly the kind of color vision Milo himself didn't have. If stories about seeing the world differently, and finding real strength in an obstacle everyone else considers a limitation, matter to you, this is exactly the kind of story we tell every week. Go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and if this story moves you, tap that like button before you go. It genuinely helps this small channel find the people who care about stories like Milo's. Now let's find out what Milo was really building on those barn doors, and why it ended up mattering to people who couldn't see color the way most people did either. Cascade County sits in the rolling farm and ranch country of southwestern Idaho, where the Winter family had run a mixed cattle and hay operation across 400 acres for 3 generations. Milo was the youngest of 3 children, diagnosed with red-green color vision deficiency during a routine school vision screening at age 7, a diagnosis that explained, retroactively, a handful of small confusions his parents had noticed but never fully understood: difficulty distinguishing certain crayons, occasional trouble reading color-coded charts at school, small frustrations that had, until the formal diagnosis, seemed more like ordinary childhood carelessness than anything with a real explanation. The diagnosis changed how Milo's parents, Dale and Priscilla Winter, understood their son's occasional struggles, but it also gave Milo himself, once he was old enough to fully grasp what it meant, a particular kind of practical determination to build his own workarounds for situations where color mattered and his own eyes simply couldn't reliably help him. The barn door project started, as far as Priscilla could recall, from a genuinely practical frustration the summer Milo turned 10. The family's equipment shed and several outbuildings had, over the years, accumulated a haphazard system of colored tags and markers: red for equipment needing repair, green for ready-to-use tools, a system that worked fine for the rest of the family but that Milo found genuinely difficult to navigate reliably, since red and green, the 2 colors his particular form of colorblindness made hardest to distinguish, sat at the center of nearly every informal marking system the farm relied on. Milo mentioned the frustration to his father that June, not as a complaint exactly, but as a problem he wanted to solve himself. Dale, a practical man who'd learned over 3 years to take his son's colorblindness seriously as a genuine daily obstacle rather than a minor inconvenience, told Milo he was welcome to develop whatever system worked best for him, so long as it didn't interfere with anyone else's ability to use the buildings normally. What Milo built that summer, working through library books on color vision and, with his mother's help, researching how colorblind accessible design actually worked in fields like industrial signage and traffic engineering, was a system considerably more sophisticated than a 10-year-old's casual project might suggest. He'd learned, through that research, a principle that would eventually matter far beyond his own family's barn. Reliable colorblind accessible marking couldn't depend on hue alone, since hue was exactly the dimension his own vision, and the vision of millions of colorblind people generally, processed unreliably. Real accessibility required combining color with distinct pattern, shape, and brightness contrast, redundant visual information that worked even when one channel, color, failed to convey the needed distinction. Milo applied that principle to every barn door and outbuilding entrance on the property that summer, developing a consistent, deliberate system. Each door received not just a color but a specific pattern: stripes, diamonds, solid bands, dots, painted in combinations chosen specifically for maximum brightness contrast rather than relying on the red-green distinctions that gave him, and he'd learned from his research, roughly 8% of all men some meaningful difficulty. He tested each combination against his own vision repeatedly, adjusting patterns that still felt ambiguous to him until he built a system he could navigate reliably himself, regardless of lighting conditions. His older brother, Ross, 16 and generally more interested in his truck than his little brother's projects, found the whole thing mildly baffling that summer. "Why not just use words?" Ross asked him once, watching Milo carefully measure out a diamond pattern on the equipment shed door. Milo explained, with the patient thoroughness he brought to most explanations of his own condition, that words required reading distance and light most people took for granted, while a pattern and brightness contrast could register faster from further away and in worse conditions than text ever could. Ross shrugged and went back to his truck, unconvinced but not unkind about it. Word of Milo's project moved through Cascade County's small ranching community the way most things did, through the feed store and casual conversation among neighbors who'd known the Winter family for years. Hollis Dunbar, who ran cattle on the adjoining section, mentioned to another rancher that the Winter boy had painted every door on his family's barn a different pattern, like some kind of code only he understands. A comment delivered with genuine affection but the settled assumption, shared by most of the county, that Milo's project was a charming, if elaborate, way for a colorblind kid to feel more in control of his own small world, rather than anything the rest of Cascade County needed to think seriously about. Milo finished the full system by that August, every door on the property marked with its own distinct color pattern combination. A project that satisfied its original, practical goal completely, giving Milo reliable, independent navigation of his family's outbuildings without needing to guess at red-green distinctions that had never served him well. The fire started just after midnight that October, an electrical fault in the hay barn's older wiring sparking a blaze that spread with alarming speed through dry, stored hay before Dale, woken by the smell of smoke, managed to call it in. Cascade County's volunteer fire department responded within 20 minutes, but by the time the first truck arrived, thick smoke had reduced visibility across the entire barnyard to almost nothing, obscuring not just the burning structure itself but the layout of the surrounding outbuildings the crew needed to navigate quickly to assess whether the fire posed any risk of spreading to adjacent structures housing livestock. Among the responding crew was a firefighter named Curtis Aldana, a 9-year veteran of the department who happened to share Milo's exact form of color vision deficiency, a condition that current fire service standards, unlike decades past, no longer automatically disqualified a firefighter from serving, provided the individual could demonstrate reliable performance through adapted training and equipment. Curtis had built his own career-long habits around exactly the kind of color-independent visual processing Milo had spent that summer teaching himself, and as the crew worked to navigate the smoke-choked barnyard toward the outbuildings closest to the burning barn, Curtis was the first to notice something genuinely useful about the property's markings. "Whoever marked these doors knew what they were doing," Curtis said to his crew chief, gesturing toward the equipment shed's distinctive diamond pattern, still faintly visible through the smoke haze in a way the department's own standard red and green hazard tags, mounted on a nearby fence post, simply weren't. The pattern's high brightness contrast and distinct shape cut through smoke-obscured, low-light conditions in a way color alone, especially the red-green distinctions Curtis's own vision struggled with just as unreliably as Milo's, couldn't manage nearly as effectively. The crew used Milo's door markings, Dale would later learn from Curtis directly, as an informal navigation reference through the worst of that night's smoke, quickly identifying which structures were equipment storage, which held feed, and which, critically, needed immediate checking for livestock, information that sped their assessment of the property considerably faster than it would have gone using only the county's standard signage in those conditions. The hay barn itself was a total loss by morning, a serious financial blow to the Winter family's operation, but the fire never spread to any adjacent structure, and no animals were lost, an outcome the department's incident report credited partly to the crew's rapid, accurate assessment of the property layout under genuinely difficult visibility conditions. Curtis came by the property himself 3 days later, once the immediate aftermath had settled, specifically to find the boy whose door markings had helped his crew that night. He found Milo in the yard and, crouching to the boy's level with genuine professional respect, explained exactly what Milo's system had done for the crew that night, and once Milo mentioned his own colorblindness almost as an aside, Curtis told him, with real feeling, that he shared the same condition, and that Milo's instinctive design principles matched almost exactly what fire service accessibility researchers had been recommending in professional literature Curtis himself had studied. During his own training, Dale and Priscilla, hearing the full account from Curtis directly, found themselves genuinely moved in a way the practical satisfaction of Milo's original project had never quite prepared them for, watching their son's private workaround for his own daily frustrations turn out to have mattered, in a genuinely serious emergency, to trained professionals navigating a real crisis. By the following spring, Curtis had brought Milo's door-marking approach to Cascade County's Volunteer Fire Department Training Committee, proposing that the department's own hazard and structure signage across the county incorporate the same brightness and pattern redundancy principles Milo had developed independently, changes that would benefit not just Curtis's own colorblind vision but potentially any firefighter working through smoke, darkness, or other conditions where color alone proved unreliable. The committee adopted a modified version of the guidance that Summer, crediting, in its own training materials, a Cascade County family's barn marking system, as the practical inspiration. Milo never made much of what happened that October. When people asked how he'd known his system would work for firefighters, he usually gave some version of the same honest answer. He hadn't known anything about firefighting when he started. He'd simply built the system he needed for himself, to solve his own daily frustration with a farm full of red and green markers he couldn't reliably tell apart, and it turned out that solving his own problem carefully enough had solved, without his ever intending it, a problem considerably larger than his own barnyard. There is a particular kind of design wisdom that comes only from living with a limitation the rest of the world doesn't design around, the discipline of building something that works reliably when the easier, more common solution simply doesn't apply to you. Milo Winter hadn't set out to help a volunteer fire crew navigate a smoke-filled barnyard or improve his county's emergency signage standards. He'd simply refused to keep struggling with red and green markers that never worked for his own eyes, and in solving that problem thoroughly enough to trust completely, he built something that turned out to matter to more people than he'd ever imagined were quietly struggling with exactly the same thing.